the interesting question will be whether or not the recent sanctions affect Chinese and indeed Indian and others' willingness to continue to buy Russian energy. Will it affect the kind of technical support that China provides, which is that it's not really providing kind of large open arms supplies, but Chinese components are still pretty important to Russian military production. Although I would add that so do European components, and US components still turn up from time to time. So there is still sanctions evasion underway. So Chinese support is economic, helping the Russians keep their economy going, and military technical. What's interesting is that what's recently emerged is what is the reverse, and we recently, my team recently produced some commentary on some leaked papers that have been obtained, which show that the Russians have actually provided military support, training, and equipment to the Chinese development of air assault forces, amphibious forces. And the strong implication is because that is an area where the Russians have some expertise and the Chinese are looking to develop ahead of, their much touted threat to Taiwan. So this relationship, it isn't a NATO-like strong kind of alliance of both values and integration of command and military capability, but it is material, it is significant, and it continues to develop.
And on the other side of that international support, this support for Ukraine from European allies, Zelensky has today or recently voiced a level of thanks to Britain and France, who have said they might send more Mirage jets, air defense, and drones to Ukraine. What do you make of Europe's support for Ukraine at the moment?
Europe has been able to maintain its support, and there's been a little bit of expansion of it too. I think the UK is talking about now the value of its support being worth up to £4.5 billion this year. And it continues to run the International Fund for Ukraine. It's taken over the lead of the Ukraine Defence Contact Group. So that is, continues to help coordinate. In fact, there is a more coordinated process getting material support in. The challenges are, multiple. The first is that there has been some criticism of the quality of some Western-provided weapons, particularly drones. So companies are stepping up. A lot of the early support to Ukraine on drones actually came externally. Ukrainian defense industry is now taken over a significant proportion of that, probably the majority. And that's because they're in country, they have individual contacts and relationships with Ukrainian brigades. And so they're able to update very, very rapidly. And so there is a question of, is Western defense industry prepared to get in closer into Ukraine so that they can get the necessary technical feedback to stay up to date in the face of the evolving environment? The second issue is sheer volume. And the thing is that there has been a bit of a drop over the past couple of months of European aid. And now that's, of course, because it doesn't come in uniformly. So we shouldn't regard that as the new normal. But they are attempting to compensate for the dropping US material aid. The US under Trump has made open a facility for European countries to buy more weapons and equipment from the US and then give them to Ukraine, which is good. But the simple fact is that the large donations that came from US supplies authorized under President Biden and the purchases that came under a parallel process are now running out, and some have still months or might even maybe a couple of years before they start being delivered. But we are well past the high watermark. And overall, that means a net drop, a net reduction in the amount that is going compared to 18 months ago. And this is an incredibly resource-intensive war. And then finally, there is still the issue of people, and that is both recruitment, but it's also training to them to the required standard. Probably in country as well. So there's still a European training effort. Some of that is specialist, but a lot of it is just basic infantry skills. And the Ukrainians are working out how do they actually get them people up to the standard for the fight as it currently looks like How do they coordinate the need between brigades? That requires them using higher levels of command. And how do they also rotate them in and out of the line? Many have been stuck there for months, and so they're tired. And so there are lots of areas there where Europe will have the opportunity to potentially do more and help the Ukrainians.
And just finally, Matthew, as I appreciate we haven't got a huge amount of time left now, Trump is still behind this idea of some sort of freezing of the lines. Europe and Zelensky have backed that, and Zelensky has said recently he's working on some sort of plan by which that could be done. We know Russia are not on board with this, and so it is difficult to say what this would look like exactly. But is it possible at the moment to stop the lines where they are? Does Ukraine have and Russia have the capability to kind of draw a solid line on the map, considering how much of the front line is also still a sort of grey zone at the minute?
Yes, so having described that kind of mixed contact zone, it would be really hard to draw a line where it is now. I think that would be for discussion as part of the terms of any ceasefire, which is essentially, would there be a stepping back in some places? Would you have to delineate the territory and now say, okay, now you need to effectively separate out of this contact zone? Would there even be a small demilitarized zone in the middle, something that could be monitored? Or would you just have them butting up against each other? The problem for the Ukrainians is the line is in a not very favourable position at the moment, for two core reasons. I mean, first, in some places it's literally through the centre of settlements. How would you work that out? Would you have half a town under different occupation? And if you had to do, so-called land swaps in order to even that up, well, what would the Russians demand? So it's just very technically complicated to do it. The second would be, because of where the Russians are, even if there was a small levelling up of the line, they have the advantage in some places in terms of higher ground or access to other areas, which means if you're Ukrainian and you not unreasonably fear a resumption of fighting, the Russians would be starting from a position of a degree of advantage. And I think also, finally, we know the Russians would chance their arm and demand the rest of at least Donetsk. And that means giving up the fortress belts, which are, urban areas that had a population of hundreds of thousands before the war. And that would be a huge sacrifice for Ukraine for dubious benefit. But the problem there is if you don't want the lines to be where they are currently, you have to find a way to force the Russians back. And in some respects, that's why this deep strike campaign is ramping up, because they're trying to work out whether they can inflict pain on Russia in ways that are other simply than destroying their forces at the front.